Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for session number 8 in my series One Flower 8 Ways. Today I'm going to be using Faber-Castell Gelatos. They come in lots of different colors. They are kind of like a creamy crown. You can see you don't get really a fine tip here, so I'm going to be using my Aqua Painter to apply the color. So it's going to be watercolor. I've got my image embossed on some Strathmore 90-pound watercolor paper. If you apply these directly to the paper, you get a pretty vibrant look, but I'm going to be applying water, which means that it's going to dilute the color just a little bit, so it's going to look a little bit more faded than it would if I had directly applied it. So let's get started. I am going to take my colors. I've got my Ranger craft mat here, and I'm going to put some yellow and some orange. Okay, I've got my Aqua Painter. This is the Stampin' Up! Aqua Painter. And what I'm going to do first with these is I'm going to apply the yellow first. So I'm going to grab some yellow. You can see it really works well with water. And I'm going to color the whole entire petal with yellow. Now I have found that when I apply water to the gelato and let it dry, it really doesn't have any sort of waxy or creamy finish. It's very smooth with the paper. So I'm going to go ahead and color the whole thing. In fact, I'm going to do 2 of these. And once I let it dry, it becomes permanent. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that so that I don't have any issues with my orange once I apply that. So I'm going to let that dry for just a minute. All right, it looks pretty dry now, and it's going to be pretty smooth. The reason why I wanted to let that first layer dry first before applying the next layer is because it really minimizes the water, and that's what you want to do with the gelatos, because the more water you add, the more faded it gets, and it fades pretty quickly. So by putting one layer on with a little amount of water and then letting it dry, now I've kind of gotten rid of the water, and now I'm starting with more water, but I won't need as much because I've only got the one color. Okay, so let me go ahead and pick up some orange now. And it looks really vibrant on my craft mat, but when I put it down here, you'll see it kind of fades quite a bit. But I'm going to apply it in the same areas that I have used previously, my shadow areas. And it also helps to wipe off your brush. I've got a tissue here. I'm just going to wipe off some color periodically and pick up some more and try to get this as dark as I can. But it is quite challenging to get as much color variation as we have been getting with some of the other mediums. So I'm going to put some right here in this crease. You can see where whenever I have less water, I get a much more vibrant color. So I'm just going to drop it in wherever the shadow, where the shadow areas are, and not blending it really at this point. I just want to get my color on there. All right, once I apply my orange, now I'm going to clean this off a little bit, and then I'm going to go back in and just kind of soften that line between the orange and the yellow. And once that orange dries, it's going to be pretty permanent, but it's going to take a little bit to dry. It's not going to dry immediately. And I really want to just do as little as possible with these gelatos. And you can see down here where I added a little bit extra water, it really has faded that orange. So I can always go back and pick up some more if I want. I can let it dry and put another layer on. So there are different ways you can use to get more color on there, but it is a little bit more challenging. So let me move on to this next one. Pick up some orange, apply it right there in my shadow areas, down here at the base of the petal, and up this crease. You see how light that is. I do have quite a bit of water I can feel on this brush, but I can always stop, wipe it, and then pick up a little bit more. And you can use a paintbrush if you think that might help you get a little bit more control of the water. Personally, I like to use the Aqua Painter because I feel like I get more control of the water that's coming out. So I'm going to wipe that. I actually want to add a little bit more orange if I can in these corner areas. Then I'll wipe my brush and blend the two together. And kind of just pull a little bit of that orange, but you got to be careful. See, it's already fading into the yellow. All right, so actually, wait a minute, I want to add a little bit more orange in there. So as you can imagine, this is probably not my first choice for coloring in this way. I have done a flower before with gelatos where I applied the gelatos directly to the paper and I blended it with my finger, and it really looks beautiful. But with this, when you're trying to apply this sort of detailed perspective look, it's too hard to do that because the tips of the gelatos are really not made for that. So anyway, I'll fast forward this and finish my coloring. Now that I've gotten my first coat of all that down, I'm going to actually go back in and accent a little bit more with both the orange and the yellow. So I'm going to pick up some orange. Now that it has dried, it's going to be easier to get more of a darker color. And I will blend it out. And then where the yellow has faded, because I've added water to blend it with the orange, I can also add yellow on top of that to get another layer of vibrancy. So I'm kind of doing two of them at a time here. So I let it dry just a little bit. And while the orange is still wet on that first layer that I had, I could still move it around. So as long as it's not dried, you can still move your color around. Now it won't affect the yellow that's been placed underneath, which is kind of nice because that has already been dried. Alright, so there you go. I think in the end it looks really pretty. It just requires a little bit more work, patience, and determination, I think, to get the look that you want. So let me finish this flower down here. Okay, so there you have it. Let's get started with the green. Right, I forgot to mention that the colors I used on this were lemon and tangerine. So now moving on to the greens. The two greens that I'm going to be using are not labeled, so I'm not sure. I'll have to figure that out. They must have come in a set. Okay, so I've got a light one and a dark one. I'm going to do the same thing I did before, and I know I'm going to need a lot more of this lighter green because it goes on extremely light. And then I have the dark. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Test out my brush here. Is I'm going to apply a bunch or all over color of the light one, just like I did with the yellow. You can see how you get little shavings that come off, and they do get a little bit annoying if you pick it up with your brush. But if you you can use them on the paper, they will dissolve. So I'm going to go ahead and color all of this. Okay, I've let that dry, so now I'm going to start picking up my dark green. I'm going to start at the base here. Same thing I've done in all my other videos with this image, is I'm going to go up the sides with my darker color and around up to the tip, but not all the way around. And I'm going to come up a little bit in the middle. And you can see it's pretty faded. I'm going to get some color off, and I can push the color back in if I want to. I can move that second color around as long as it hasn't dried, and it won't affect the first layer of green that I put on there. So I want a little bit darker down here, but again, it's going to be harder to do. So the best thing at this point is to let it dry, and then, oops, no, that's probably too much, and then go back and add a second layer. So let me finish these two. Alright, I let that first layer dry of this dark green, so I'm going to add a second layer to try to darken up some of those shadow areas. And you can see it does darken it up. I want a little bit, actually want a little bit more of that lighter green up there, so I'm going to add a second layer of that. That might be too much, but because it's still wet, I can take it off. Alright, I think I'm going to leave it at that. And now I'm going to work on a second layer at on these bottom ones. Alright, not too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the one over here, and I'll be right back. Alright, I've already applied 2 layers to this one, but I want it even darker. So I'm going to apply a third one. And this is probably my least favorite part of the gelatos, is the waiting for it to dry. Now, you could take a heat tool and you can heat it up, but I really don't like to do that unless I have to, because it just warps the paper. Okay, so I'm going to leave that, and now what I'm going to do is color the rest of these leaves with the light color, and I'll be right back. Alright, now I'm going to take my darkest one, and as you've seen me do many times, I'm just going to color the base of this leaf and kind of up these little lines. And I've got quite a bit of water going on, so it is definitely faded, but I'm going to keep working at it because I can definitely see a difference in color. And I'm just going to have to add a couple of layers. So just going to go through this. It's hard because you want the brush to be pretty darn dry, but when it's dry it starts to spread out, the bristles start to spread out, and it's harder to get a precise application of your color. So it's a delicate balance. So let's go ahead and finish up. I'm going to put some at the base here, and actually I'm going to blend that a little bit. All these, I don't want any harsh lines, so I'm going to be careful that I don't let it dry with a harsh line because it will be permanent. All right, I'm going to let that dry for a second. Well, actually, wait. That one. Okay, I'm going to let that dry for a second. All right, that's dry, so I'm going to go back in with another layer. And it doesn't actually take that long to dry because I'm not putting that much color in here. I'm not using a lot of water, so it doesn't take more than a minute or two. But that's, you know, a minute or two times however many minutes I keep doing this, it starts to add up. All right, I'm going to start working on some of these other areas and let that dry, and I might come back to it. And again, this one's really super small, so I'm just going to add a little bit of color, not too much. And then for my stems, I'm just going to add a little bit where, just kind of on the left a little bit, where the stems meet mostly. Going back in again on this one, it's really starting, you're starting to see the different color now that I have that base. It's not quite the depth you get with some of the other mediums when you just apply the one layer. So again, this probably is not my choice for this type of image. I like to use the gelatos more for backgrounds. I'm just going to blend this out. And I forgot to do that middle portion, so I'm just going to add a little bit of the dark color at the bottom. Okay, well, I think that this is about as much as I'm willing to do. So it's not perfect. Well, maybe just a little bit more right there. It's not perfect, but actually it's too much. Okay, so that is the gelatos. Challenging, yes, for sure. Let's see how they compare. Let me clean this up quickly and we'll see how they compare. All right, I'm going to stay close up for just a minute because I'm going to show you specific one-on-ones. So I think that it compares best with the wet Inktense pencils. You're getting more of a similar look as the wet Inktense pencils. The most different is probably the zig markers. You could see how crazy vibrant. I don't know if the camera really shows it, but this is super, super vibrant, and this is much more muted. You can compare it to the distress markers, which is one of my favorites. This one has darker orange and lighter yellow. This didn't seem to blend as much as this blended. This blended actually pretty nicely. But look at how dark the green is and the different, you can really get a dark, nice shadow with the distress markers. The Gonzai Tombi, I actually really love this. At first I was like, oh, I don't know if I really like it. It's a totally different look. You don't get as much blending. It's not quite as smooth, but it's definitely a really beautiful watercolor look. And then we have the Peerless Watercolors, which actually is pretty comparable to the Gelatos. And then the Copic markers, which gives you a beautiful, very, very smooth look. And then finally we have the dry Inktense pencils, which can get a little kind of blocky, choppy with all the different, up and down with the marker. I'm sorry, the pencil. So let me spread these out a little bit, see if I can get them all in camera. So here they are all laid out together. This one is the Gelato right here. They're all on Strathmore watercolor paper, which is a little bit off-white, except for the Copic markers and the dry Inktense pencils. These are on Nina Solar White. So these are going to be a little bit more whiter cardstock. I enjoyed this series so much. I'm so glad we did it. I'm going to have a poll and you can vote for your favorite. And I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.